I'm going to make this as quick as possible, but I'm going to warn you all right now that the video I'm covering is not only really long, almost 50 minutes in length, but it's also wrong in so many ways that correcting every piece of misinformation I found is just going to take a while by necessity. I'll be skipping parts of the video incredibly liberally, which basically means I'm going to be stripping the video down to its barest nuts and bolts possible, in hopes of keeping this commentary from reaching movie length, but I make no promises. I also know that Neko Koda already covered this video, and do not get me wrong, I love that video, but she only managed to scratch the surface of things wrong with the video in question. With that said, I highly doubt I'll manage to find everything wrong with this video because, well, there's just so damn much. In fact, to paraphrase the Bible, Omnizoa's video had many other issues as well. If every one of them were pointed out, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the commentaries that would be made. John 21:25. Kind of. Also, given the little research I did do on this person plus the topic we're covering, I wouldn't be surprised if either this guy or one of his fans tried to paint me as some kind of triggered, liberal, SJW cuck who's offended at the video. And I just want to say, if you think I am offended at this video, you are absolutely correct. Albeit, I'm not really offended for the reason most people would think I would be. If I may steal a quote from Doodle Tones,
I'm not even offended that you said it, more offended that you believe this to be a legitimate point.
I'll admit, I was offended watching this video. Because the idea that somebody could make a video with arguments this bad, and then think they were good, actively offends my intelligence. But, with all that said, let's get into this. Oh my god, Omnizoa, you're so cool. Can I suck your dick? Yeah, this is one of the bigger issues I have with both this video and every Omnizoa video I've seen. His intro, which is nothing more than a couple of clips that are edited together in hopes of making it look cool that he's arguing against transgender rights, combined with the fact that this is what our presenter looks like, it all just screams to me, am I cool yet? If I lean back slightly more, will you all be my friends? Dude, the butch 90s political lesbian look is simply not working out for you. I'm sorry to have to be the one who has to break it to you.
So I've been thinking about a number of topics to do for a return video, and one of the many questions I get asked most often is, what are your pronouns?
You know, every day people stop me on the street and say, Matt, my life is a miserable spiraling black hole of depression and self-loathing because I'm overwhelmed by trying to sort through the Greek manuscript evidence supporting the New Testament. What can you do for me?
Now, my gut reaction to this question is usually, guess, dumbass, but I
Well,
try to be
you
polite and
seem
explain
pleasant.
to them that I don't care what pronouns they use. Truth is, regardless of whether the question was well-intended or not, I can't help but take offense, because I stopped giving a shit about pronouns when I was in daycare.
You stopped caring about proper nouns when you were in daycare? Well, all I'm going to say is I'd hate to see your English tests.
So how do you think it comes across when a full-grown adult condescends to ask me what pronouns I prefer? The political context is a horror show all its own, and to see this shit on corporate memos now?
Okay, I actually looked up this PepsiCo memo. Not once does it mention pronouns. Hell, the only thing that could be seen as a reference to transgender people in general is one section where it talks about PepsiCo's support for the LGBT community. Most of it is about the history of ensuring equal pay for women, hiring veterans, and accommodating the disabled. This seems to go beyond what gender you identify as, is all I'm saying.
But let's back up a bit, because I think for you to really get a good picture of where I'm coming from, I gotta tell you a little bit about myself. Now, when I grew up, I think it was reasonably fair to say that I was a bit of a gender-ambiguous child. I had longish hair, higher-pitched voice, and my real-life name is gender-neutral. Suffice it to say, I got misgendered a lot, and I remember getting upset about it. I'm not like them. They're gross. They have cooties.
And I, for some reason, took on my best gay Mad Hatter voice to be mad at them. In hindsight, I'm not entirely sure why.
But eventually I got to thinking, because just like everyone else, I was exposed to the same bullshit stereotypes. Boys wear blue, girls wear pink, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, separate toy aisles, separate career paths, separate bathrooms, it's all dumb. Gender roles are a blight upon humanity, and they should have been nuked from outer space.
I just want to say, I have no idea what point the text on the bottom of the screen is trying to make, and I'm too afraid to ask. By segregating public bathrooms, we create a Streisand effect regarding nudity. Well, the most obvious issue is, you do know that people don't tend to get naked in public restrooms, right? Oh, and as for the stupid fucking meme that you have in the background, which, spoiler alert, is going to become one of his main points in the video, on and off, because this video is not very coherent, I'm just going to say that we consider gender in this context to be a matter of self-identification, with what it means to be a man or a woman in the context of gender to be entirely relative to the individual. So, as such, how much being a man or a woman would involve gender roles is, again, completely up for the individual to decide. If you want to go after this belief, that's perfectly fine. People do that all the time. I don't find any of the arguments against this belief compelling, but it does happen. But you aren't even stating this belief in the first place to argue against it.
There's no justifiable reason to gender concepts unless they are tethered to your genitals. And so this is what persuaded me before the age of 10 that gender pronouns were completely pointless. After all, if I take offense to someone, say, referring to me as a girl, does that not imply that I consider the mere concept of being a girl derogatory and insulting?
It would in no way apply that. If somebody repeatedly and constantly gets your name wrong, that's likely going to bother you after a while. That doesn't mean you think there's something wrong with having a different name. That means you don't believe that name to be yours. Here, let me give you an example to show just how nonsensical this idea is. Now, did anybody watch that clip and think, oh my god, Patrick hates people named Rick? Anyone? Anyone?
Anyone?
The answer is, of course not, because that would be ridiculous. In that clip, Patrick was angry because the name Rick was not his, not because he hated people named Rick. And although this is obviously exaggerated because it's a cartoon, it's likely most people would respond the same way if you got their name wrong for long enough. Same with height, hair color, eye color, and many other characteristics. Although, I guess the one about hair color doesn't actually apply to you, considering you keep changing your hair color throughout the video. Seriously, why do you keep doing that? It doesn't actually matter, I know. If only because such a statement would be objectively wrong. Yeah, I don't like it when people say things that are wrong about me. I wouldn't like to be called trans, for example. Not because I think there's anything wrong with being transgender. I mean, if I did, I very likely wouldn't be making this commentary right now would I? But because I'm not. That's a point that I think is overlooked a lot. And honestly, one of the things that annoyed me about Neko's response to the same video. People like me believe that transgender women are women, so calling them something else is not only insulting, it's also just wrong.
Yeah, gender roles suck, which is why I've adopted a different gender role. Yeah, gender roles suck, which is why I've invented several new gender roles.
This is something Omni's going to do throughout the entire video. Occasionally he'll just flash pictures of various people on the screen who I think he thinks proves his point in some way. Of course, the first person he shows appears to have had actual facial feminization surgery done, and the second person appears to have just cleaned their face and grown their hair out. However, without actually knowing anything about either of these people, it just feels like he's putting up random pictures without any context. He says that one person adopted a new set of gender roles, and the second person invented a bunch of new gender roles, apparently. But again, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know who these people are. Who are these people? I'm not saying Omni is wrong. In fact, I can't say that because I have so little information on this situation. I'm just saying that if this is the case, he has not actually conveyed that to his audience. And as for that not progressive buzzard, as if progressivism is some kind of religion we have to live according to the teachings of, and not a political ideology that we use to determine how society more generally should be structured. If either of these people decided they wanted to just be effeminate men, I'd be fine with that. That should be made apparent by the fact that my avatar is currently an effeminate man. However, that is not the choice in life they wanted to make, and again, I'm also perfectly fine with that.
Alright, let's talk about pop culture for a bit, because believe it or not, I used to be pretty optimistic. Cast your mind back to before the turn of the millennium. So tonight I'm gonna party like it's 1999. Glam rock and hair metal represented not just an aesthetic shift towards androgyny, but it was symbolic of a general cultural repudiation of social norms.
Wait, are we talking about the turn of the millennium still? Because glam rock and hair metal was more the 1980s than anything else. Hell, the song you played during your montage of your favorite rock bands, which I skipped largely because it didn't actually add anything to the video, was Dude Looks Like a Lady by Aerosmith, which came out in 1987. The 1990s was more boy bands like the Backstreet Boys, Backstreet's Back, alright, and New Kids on the Block, and punk rock. Plus Marilyn Manson, him too.
The conservatism of years past was now the butt of the joke, where music videos now featured entire skits mocking the stereotypical nuclear family at home.
That's just what mainstream music had looked like from the mid-60s onwards. Woodstock, anyone?
But that's not all. During the same time, Japan was going through its own cultural shift, arguably with an even greater gender divide than countries in the West. And with the import of glam rock and hair metal, came Visual Kei. Sadly, Visual Kei would not get much traction overseas, but Japanese video games did, and the glam rock and hair metal influence would not go unnoticed. Take, for example, Poison from Final Fight and Street Fighter. Poison is a transsexual, borrowing her name and character design from the American band Poison.
Wait, I thought you were talking about androgyny a couple of seconds ago. Now you're showing us someone with pink long hair and massive breasts. Call me crazy, but that doesn't seem very androgynous to me. Oh, also, Poison being transsexual, was only done by Capcom because they wanted to make it acceptable to hit her in their games. Just a little fun fact for you all.
Anime and manga would shortly follow, and while its initial distribution typically marketed Dragon Ball towards boys and Sailor Moon towards girls, Japanese media, as you know, took the world by storm.
Okay, for those curious, Visual Kei was at its biggest in Japan in the 80s and 90s. Meanwhile, unless you want to count Saturday morning cartoons that were scared to tell children about rice balls...
These donuts are great! Jelly-filled are my favorite! Nothing beats a jelly-filled donut!
Most actual adult anime, where things like Visual Kei would be seen, didn't catch on until the mid-2000s onwards. Long after Visual Kei had faded in Japan. This history lesson is incredibly mangled is my point. Omni clearly has no idea the history of either of the cultures he's talking about, nor did he bother doing any research on the topic. Anyway, he goes on to talk about sexuality for a bit, plus his own dislike for the concept of marriage, but that adds literally nothing to the video, so I'm cutting it all out. I will note that at one point he shows a picture of the Supreme Court in the context of their decision which made gay marriage legal across the United States, and he shows the wrong Supreme Court. That's not the Supreme Court in 2015, this is. Notice the presence of Antonin Scalia and Anthony Kennedy.
Just a month after the ruling, Wheaties athlete Bruce Jenner would grace the cover of Vanity Fair as Caitlyn Jenner.
Actually, the Supreme Court case which made same-sex marriage legal nationwide was decided after Jenner's Vanity Fair cover by about a month, but who's keeping track at this point?
Idpol cultists like to insist that LGBT was always a thing, as far back as Stonewall.
I mean, the term LGBT was coined around 1988, so not as far back as Stonewall, sure, but still pretty damn far back.
But the Pride movement, much like the communist movement it shares a literal circle jerk with,
it's called having a comrade with benefits, okay?
is no stranger to historical revisionism.
Okay, I did some very basic looking into this, and by that I mean I just checked the Wikipedia page he's currently showing a screenshot of, and I found that the LGBT Foundation is United Kingdom based. Why is that important? Because although there are a handful of United Kingdom charities that are full LGBT, there are still several that aren't. Groups like the Committee for Homosexual Equality and, oh, I don't know, the LGB Alliance, which was literally created by ex-Stonewall members who did not agree with Stonewall's push for transgender rights.
But what the actual fuck is a transgender?
I assume it was the thing we had been talking about for the past 9 minutes. Guess not.
As far as I could reason out, this could refer to one or both or neither of two kinds of trans person we already had terms for.
A real quick note on the text on the bottom of the screen right here. I actually checked the Wikipedia page for Boys Don't Cry, and the word transgender has been used directly to describe the plot of the film since 2009.
One was transvestite.
I'm just a sweet transvestite.
Sorry, that's just the first thing that comes to mind every time I hear that word. Oh, also, I'm cleverly weaving this into a future point I'm going to make later. Don't worry, it's going to be really cool and clever. The other media clips were just for fun, though.
Someone who performs the act of cross-dressing. The other was transsexual, someone who has undergone sexual reassignment surgery.
Actually, transsexual has just historically meant the same thing transgender currently means. It's never been directly related to specifically undergoing a sex change operation. Hence why there were terms like post-op and pre-op transsexual. The op being short for operation, and the operation being sex reassignment surgery. Also, because the song's going to be stuck in my head anyway.
From transsexual Transylvania.
That one was purely for fun, by the way. I just want to make that clear.
The problem here is that the LGB, part of LGBT, are all sexualities, and neither transvestism or transsexualism are. Gay, lesbian, and bi all describe a hypothetical person's sexual attraction atypical of their sex. Transgenderism, whatever it was, clearly did not fit this mold. This was an issue because for the purposes of argument, gays, lesbians, and bisexuals have no choice in their status as gays, lesbians, or bisexuals.
Omni, do you think transgender people chose to be transgender? Do you think they chose what gender they prefer to identify with? Because if so, it seems pretty damn stupid to pick anything other than the one you're already native to.
The same cannot be said of someone who merely elects to cross-dress or get cosmetic surgery.
That's a terrible comparison. True, cross-dressing and cosmetic surgery are a choice, but the desire to undergo those things is not a choice. This would be like saying that homosexuality is a choice because, hey, people choose who they have sex with, while ignoring the fact that the desire to have sex with certain people is not a choice. Essentially, you're confusing desire with action.
But that also turned out to be an issue, because back in 2015, I could not for the life of me get a single person to lay down a simple, coherent definition for what a transgender even was.
I mean, look at how confused Joseph Stalin is. Clearly this proves trans people are dumb.
Many people would tell me terms like transvestite or transsexual were offensive and provided no reasons why.
Why would a transgender person not want to be called a transvestite? A term which has historically really just been used as a slang term for drag queens. Maybe because the term conjures images of, well, this?
I'm just a sweet transvestite.
You see, I told you that media clip would be used cleverly. I weaved it in so amazingly. I know, I am basically a genius at this point. But to actually answer your question, remember how I just said that when I heard the word transvestite, the first thing I thought of was a song sung by an alien sex freak in a movie named after the fuck robot built by said alien sex freak? I'm not the only one. Even ignoring the fact that the Rocky Horror Picture Show has a huge cult fan base, the fact that it was such a cultural touchstone, especially for people who were around in the 60s and 70s, to the point where it has basically become integral to certain subcultures within pop culture, let's just leave it at if you called your ordinary everyday person a term that people only really remember because of this movie, that's going to lead to a large number of people not actually understanding what it is you're talking about. I should note, I'm not insulting the movie or calling it offensive or anything. But if I went around calling every lesbian I knew Thelma because of the movie Thelma and Louise, that would create some really unfortunate implications. As for transsexual, well, I wouldn't call it offensive, but I would say it's outdated, primarily because, again, it doesn't actually communicate what you're talking about. Hence why you gave it an incorrect definition earlier in this same video.
The other was transsexual, someone who has undergone sexual reassignment surgery.
Your mistake is not an uncommon one, nor is it even the only one. I've also seen people think that transsexual is when you cross-dress for erotic purposes. It is not, but it has the suffix sexual in it, and when you hear sexual, you think, well, sex, as in the action. So people, again, commonly make that mistake. Transgender just communicates what the person is much easier and with much less confusion. That's why it's the preferred term. It's really not that complicated.
And even more would make vague claims about how transgenders felt they were born in the wrong body. Well, what does that mean? See, we can generally trust the testimonies of gays and lesbians because they are only making a claim about what they like, a claim that potentially carries the threat of great social consequences.
Okay, I am going to let him dig his own grave. Finish this point, and then I'll respond to it. Just don't worry. Don't worry. I know what some of you are thinking. Don't worry.
Suppose there aren't any consequences.
What will you learn? What will you learn? That your actions have consequences!
Suppose someone expected to be shielded from skepticism by the perception of the threat of consequences. To come out of the closet at a time like this would be stunning and brave. That is the Overton window in which we find transgenderism arriving to the proverbial table. It is while we are rolling out the red carpet treatment for lesbians, gays, and bisexuals that transgenders suddenly show up and go, oh yeah, I'm totally with these guys.
And we are at that point now. Omni, you mentioned 2015 earlier in this video. Well, fun fact, a survey from that same year found that 40% of Americans would be upset if their child came out as transgender. So I think that already kind of debunks this whole red carpet narrative that you're spewing at the moment. Oh, and don't think I didn't notice the whole stunning and brave thing, which just screams at me, hey guys, am I cool yet? I can reference South Park, ignoring the fact that South Park had an entire episode that specifically existed to make fun of transphobia, but let's keep ignoring actual reality. Also, I love the phrase, arriving on the proverbial scene. Yup, as if transgender people just came out of nowhere in 2015. Ignoring the fact that the first sex change operation on an American took place in the 1950s, with them also happening in Weimar, Germany up to a quarter century beforehand. Again, though, reality doesn't actually matter when you're talking to someone like Omnizoa, so what do I expect?
If that doesn't provoke you to question, consider then that while LGB concerns itself only with what they themselves find sexually appealing, T meanwhile is making broad physiological claims about the human condition based on a few anecdotes. Suddenly, our brain, rather than being a combination of different genetic traits inherited from our mother and father, is either male or female. A male brain can wind up in a female body, and a female brain can wind up in a male body.
Do you know what metaphors are by any chance? Because that's what the idea of male and female brains are actually supposed to be. Most people acknowledge that the concepts of a male brain and a female brain are nothing more than statistical averages that don't actually have much meaning in the real world, but some people use it as just a quick and easy way to explain how they feel. They feel like the body they have is wrong, like their brain was hardwired for a body they simply do not have. Nobody is claiming that male to female transgender people have dysphoria because somebody accidentally put Abby Normal's brain into their male body.
Now, that brain that you gave me, was it Hans Delbrooks? No. Good. Would you mind telling me whose brain I did put in?
And you won't be angry?
I will not be angry.
Abby someone.
Abby someone. Abby who?
Abby Normal.
It won't be until your early teens when coincidentally everybody starts feeling a little self-conscious about how they look and even a bit rebellious that you'll realize, I was born in the wrong body! It must be true because everybody on Tumblr says so.
Omni? That's not what someone in their early teens looks like.
I'd like to take you back once more to 2015, where I opened a forum thread on this very topic. I politely made a very long, detailed post about thoughts, questions, and concerns I had. I was honestly just very confused about all the conflicting information I had heard on the subject.
You know there are, books on the topic, right? You could have read some of those.
Only one person in that thread responded to me claiming to be transgender, and they were by far the most incoherent and nonsensical person in that entire thread.
For the record, Omni later admits that English is not this person's first language, so of course they're not going to be all that coherent. Again, there are actual books you can read on this topic, and your basis is some forum user who's not even a native speaker of the language they're trying to communicate in. Am I the only one who sees an issue here?
I am a transgender woman. This is nothing I choose to be. I am, since ever. My first recalls are me feeling what I feel just now, what I did instead all my life, until now in my 30s. I forced my mind to try so hard to rewrite itself, the initial codes, the kernel of my operating system. It's been a mountain of work, and I only did harm to myself, because I never could adjust the God's programming work. I became transformed into a big, intolerable, unbearable person, and I wasn't even aware of that. I lost everything, every notion of world of around me. I was all the time so busy to be conscious, because only like that I could pretend, I could act as an actor, the role it was not me, and I'd become a difficult person, angry, very dedicated to anything, until stress was put into that. I was punctilious. What the fuck does punctilious mean?
It means showing great attention to detail or correct behavior. I know that because the definition is right behind you. Watch out, Omnizoa! The definition of punctilious is right behind you!
But eventually I get some back and forth going with them, and this is what they tell me. I personally cannot be very transparent, Omni, because what you expect from a TS in—
Wait, I thought you said people found the term transsexual to be outdated or offensive. Now you're showing a transgender person using it? Also, I'm going to be cutting out most of this forum framing thing Omni is attempting to do, primarily because, again, he's picking on someone who doesn't have English as their first language, and who's really just some random forum user.
Let's not forget Ms. Danish, the trans autist that got me banned off Twitter because I dared to suggest that kids were being overdiagnosed with depression and put on unnecessary medication, which I was.
You know, it's funny you mention that because I've actually met two people in my life who were misdiagnosed with chronic depression. Both of them are transgender, by the way, and the misdiagnosis came from a misunderstanding on why they didn't like their bodies. Just wanted to put that out there.
You know, she actually DM'd me on Discord to apologize for getting me banned. I wish I had screens of this, but I actually got her to admit that she believes her psychiatrist is medically qualified to prescribe hormone blockers and sexual reassignment surgery as a cure for gender dysphoria.
Yeah, Omni. That's what psychiatrists are medically licensed to do. I know, unbelievable. Anyway, he goes back to riffing on that forum person, and again, I'll give him the arguments are bad, but it feels like he's just picking on a child at this point. Wow, Omni, you mean somebody who can't speak English can't muster up the best arguments in English? Well, next you'll be telling me people commentate on videos because they are bad. That was a throwback for ya.
And at this point, the mask really starts to slip. I was thinking, struggling within myself. I always been afraid to be gay. I was finding homosexuality something I don't want to explore. I've never found a guy attractive. Not even now, I can't see men being attractive. Although, after I explored much inside my very deep feelings, I am in some certain way bound with some about men's sexual fantasy. The only thing it gives me thrills is men. I involuntarily ache to do everything sexually with men. I mean, I always hated men. Even now, I can't stand them much. But inside of me, I collapse thinking of sexual relationing with them. But not as a gay thing. Like, what the fuck am I supposed to take from that?
For the record, Omni has given us basically no context regarding this conversation, so we have no idea how this topic was even brought up. Hell, from the fact the screenshot he showed opened with the words, "so no," I'm led to think that Omni, or at least someone else in this conversation, brought it up and this person was just making a poorly worded response because, again, English is not their first language, and you are asking for discussion on a complex topic with someone who can barely speak the language they are trying to communicate in. I'm going to be skipping now because any conclusion he draws falls apart on that basis alone. Hey, more things I can skip, maybe this video will be over faster.
You know what doesn't help your case? Sharing the Corey Mason video. Now apparently I can't show you this video because it's been... FBI, open up!
It's the police!
Knock, 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 it's the police!
Then how are you showing us it in the background of your video? Oh no, Omnizoa! The Corey Mason video is right behind you!
So to summarize those who don't remember, it was a cell phone video of a 14-year-old boy named Corey receiving estrogen from his mother as a surprise birthday gift. Erica told BuzzFeed News that Corey was always feminine, even from the time she was very young. She loved to dress in high heels and dresses. In public, she wore boys' clothes. I just assumed she might be gay. Are you starting to see my problem here? This lady can't even look at her own fucking kid in the innocence of youth with the freedom to wear whatever he wants without compartmentalizing him. Oh, I'm sorry, son. See, if you want to wear that outfit per my obligation to the status quo, I have to assume that you're gay. After all, it is the objective fact that if the heel of your footwear is X units of measurement above the surface of the earth, then you must therefore enjoy penis. What's that? Popular YouTuber Jazz Jennings says my child may secretly have been a girl this whole time? Well, isn't that a relief? You can just be a girl then, in my worldview in which only girls wear heels can remain intact and uncontaminated by free thinking and individuality. Now bask in my progressive tolerance for people that are different, as I waste a birthday present chemically altering my child to be more like me.
For the record, I actually looked up the article Omni got that quote from. It was Corey who said she was trans, so this whole idea that her mother forced her to be because... I don't know, she was scared of having a gay kid, but would have been perfectly fine having a trans kid apparently. It doesn't make any sense. It's utter nonsense. That's what it is. It's utter nonsense. Oh, and as for why Corey's mother would think that her child behaving effeminately would be evidence of homosexuality, maybe that has something to do with the countless studies that constantly find a correlation between effeminate behavior in boys in youth and gender nonconforming behavior more generally, and homosexuality later in life. Obviously, this experience is not universal. Hell, I'm a homosexual male and I wasn't particularly feminine in youth, although nor was I particularly masculine, all things considered. But it is a well-known and very well-documented trend, and that is just undeniable.
And the YouTube influencers don't even stop there, because while Jazz Jennings would be the catalyst for Corey to become yet another brick in the wall,
wondering if you have a soul,
it was another transgender vlogger that inspired our poor self-hating gay forum bro
Thanks
to make
for the new
transition.
Discord status.
Enter Princess Jules. This is the point for me where the transgender narrative completely jumped the shark, and I never returned to the series. So this guy shares two videos with me. One of them you are seeing on screen. The other one has since been privated and I have been unable to find it back up. Essentially what this other video was a story about one of Princess Jules' suicide attempts, entitled Depression, Suicide, and Mental Breakdown. Now, suicide is really important to transgenders because it can help them sell you on the concept. If they can present themselves as a victim or a target of disproportionate abuse, you're more likely to sympathize with them. They want you to think things are bad so that you care. And suicide, in this case, just happens to be their favorite gambit. They bring it up all the time.
Wait, do they? Because I tend to remember transphobes bringing it up much more often than transgender allies do. Hell, when Jangle Science Lad made a video in 2018 debunking all of the popular transphobic arguments at the time, this idea that transgender people were killing themselves at 110% rates was one of the first things he responded to.
In this instant classic, not only does he give us the same 3 truths he told Joe Rogan, but he name drops where the study came from. The Williams Institute at UCLA. But here at Djangle's Science Channel for Rational Lads, we pride ourselves on going to the primary sources to make sure people like Ben don't leave anything out. And as luck would have it, you can access this study in full for free. Link it in the description. Now, research articles can be really long and dense, and you can't fault someone too much for occasionally messing up some minor details. After all, you'd have to be paying very close attention to see the word attempts in giant letters on the title page. A further clue is hidden away right underneath it, because surveys are generally not given to people who have committed suicide. So, Ben, I know you'd want to know if you got one of your facts wrong, but suicide rate and attempted suicide rate don't actually mean the same thing, and that's not just semantics. In fact, this article makes it very clear on page 4 that suicide attempts should not be a proxy measurement for suicide completion. For example, men are 80% of completions, but women are 75% of attempts. So just having information on the latter doesn't necessarily tell you the former. And I know, you can't trust these SJW studies to tell you the truth, unless you already knew the truth and they're saying that. But just like our boy Ben, they cite their sources, so you can go and check to find out that yes, they were representing those sources accurately. When you do that, you see things like even the most high-risk groups admitted to a hospital following a suicide attempt are thankfully more likely than not to still be around 20 or 30 years later. Add to that the Williams survey can't say whether their one question, have you ever attempted suicide, pulled in affirmative answers from people who wouldn't have met the standards for an attempt in that study. Well, okay, that's just one point. Let's move on.
So Princess Jules regales us about the time she tried to kill herself, and I'm really trying to be open-minded, but at this point, I already know that some anecdote about how sad someone got one time fundamentally cannot prove the existence of a transgender gene.
Who says it would exactly? All this video appears to be is some trans woman talking about her personal experiences. Nobody is saying that this video would fundamentally prove transgenderism is valid or whatever. And before you say, well, that forum guy linked me this video, I'm going to respond by saying you haven't given me any actual context to why these videos were linked in the first place. So again, I have no idea what the hell is even going on anymore.
I'm staring into the face of a man wearing the female equivalent of blackface, whose life and online persona revolves around acting out this hyper-exaggerated caricature of a stereotypical woman. You're wearing a costume, you're wearing makeup, you're speaking the exact—
She tied a jacket around her waist. Is that really so uncommon to you?
Same annoying as shit fake fucking voice every single man who has ever worked in HR speaks, and you're telling me I am this thing. But at no point does the laugh track play, the credits roll, or you exhibit any hint of self-awareness.
For the record, this person just looks like a socialite. Maybe a valley girl, I guess. Like, those are people who exist. You do know that, right? You called this some kind of parody of womanhood. There are women who actually act like this. Primarily wealthy ones in large cities, sure, but they do exist.
In this video, Jules describes a moment in her life where her transition is locked in. She has the support of her family, she has a loving boyfriend, she has 200,000 subscribers on YouTube cheering her on, and she is 5 days away from her psychiatrist-approved sexual reassignment surgery. This video was recorded the day before her alleged suicide attempt, and as she describes it, she was feeling anxious about the operation, even paranoid that she could die on the table when she got into an argument with her boyfriend and decided to end it all by jumping off a balcony. Okay, so let me get this straight. You have all the shit going for you. Your mom, your sister, a boyfriend, nearly 250,000 people around the world, all feeding into this egotistical fixation on your own penis. You're a nervous wreck, scared that the surgeon's gonna fucking kill you, probably annoying your boyfriend in the process. You get into what sounds like a petty squabble, and that's when you decide you want to greet the concrete at terminal velocity. Am I missing something here?
Maybe the fact that things like paranoia, anxiety, and depression tend to be internal and not external. As such, what is going on externally around her probably wouldn't have nearly as much of an impact as you are giving it credit for. Yes, you can be suicidal and depressed and anxiety-ridden, and every single thing that was listed in that statement you showed, while also having a good life. Carrie Fisher had depression and turned to drugs as a result. Kurt Cobain blew his brains out while he was at the height of his career. Specifically because he was at the height of his career, in fact. Yeah, having a good life doesn't mean that you all of a sudden aren't going to get depressed or suicidal. It's not a magic button that you can push.
You remember what I said about sympathy? Well, I'm going one step further by trying to empathize with her. And the problem there is that I have never been so privileged in my entire adult life as Princess Jules is in that moment.
So you've never been scared of an operation, nor have you felt like your fears and concerns were being brushed off. Well, 60 to 80% of the population has some form of pre-operation anxiety, and most Americans regularly feel like their concerns and fears are being dismissed. If what you're saying is true, and neither of these things have ever happened to you, then honestly, you're more privileged than you seem to realize. Oh, and by the way, remember this little statement from Omni, because it will bite him in the ass later, don't worry.
But I'm not transgender. See, that's the key. It's because transgenders are so oppressed, bullied, and misgendered that they try to kill themselves at a rate of 40%. 40%? Wait. Suicide.org says rape victims are only 13%.
Okay, so for the next 10 minutes or so, Omni is going to go back and forth between not believing the 41% figure he just cited, believing the 41% figure he just cited, and drawing massive sweeping conclusions about transgender people based off of a number that he occasionally just doesn't believe, but occasionally does, and just kind of getting mad at this number because it's not as high as the rape victim suicide rate. He doesn't attempt to make any real explanation for the disparity, nor do any investigation as to why this could be. Instead, he just kind of gets mad at the fact there's a disparity, and then gets mad at the fact that number's so high, while also explaining why that number's so high, while also not believing that number is so high. It doesn't make any fucking sense, but neither does this fucking video, and hey, what do I expect at this point? I'll be skipping all the parts that are just him getting angry and trying to get to the actual meat of what he's saying. Although, that meat is mostly bone if I'm being honest.
Yes, indeed. The 40% number that transgenders love to champion for victim points comes from the 2015 US Transgender Survey, while the 13% number comes from the 1992 Rape in America, a Report to the Nation survey. It can be argued that both of these studies dramatize the results, and
then why are you using them as your sources? You are basically admitting you are using unreliable data for this comparison on both accounts. This entire comparison, by your own admission, completely falls apart because you don't actually believe either of the numbers you are using.
The second reason that the trans attempted suicide rate is so high is because trans people often have high levels of body dysphoria and cannot access the necessary medical care to alleviate that dysphoria.
Ah, of course. Transgenders are killing themselves attempting to kill themselves en masse, because we're not just handing out tens of thousands of dollars to anyone who identifies with the medical need for steroids and surgery. Yeah, I'll sign that blank check.
Aw shit, guys, he said something in a sarcastic tone. Guess it has to be wrong then. You don't need to actually fucking explain why such a statement is wrong. Just say it in a sarcastic tone, and then it's wrong by default. That's how argumentation works.
And now that I've watched more than 5 seconds of a Riley J. Dennis video, I gotta address this.
Being trans is not a mental illness. Lots of trans people have a mental health condition, not an illness, called gender dysphoria. This used to be called gender identity disorder until the DSM-5 came out in 2013, and the American Psychiatric Association changed it to gender dysphoria, making a point to note that it is not a disorder.
Yes, Riley, the DSM-5 changed the term from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. But guess what, genius? You're still reading from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders! I'm losing my fucking mind here. The DSM should not be taken as scripture, especially when their writers are admitting they're overdiagnosing people.
Okay, he goes on to play a clip for over 3 minutes. That's just a guy talking about how more people get diagnosed with certain mental disorders as definitions expand, which, by the way, yeah, that is how definitions work. If you give more broad definitions, more people will fall into that category. The person in question never once says that the DSM is overdiagnosing people, although he does make note that expanding the definitions also expanded the amount of patients by a higher rate than what was expected. So I kind of understand why Omni drew that conclusion, but it falls apart because the man in question never actually criticizes expanding the definitions. He always makes it clear why it was done. He just says that it caused the rate of people with this condition to increase by more than what was expected, which, yeah, that's just going to happen sometimes. As if it's the DSM that's diagnosing people, I should note, and not psychologists. Just as a little for the record, who this person is or why they're saying this is also never explained, nor does Omni ever actually give us any reason to believe him, so this is all just one giant waste of fucking time.
Oh, what? You haven't seen that clip before? You shouldn't have to have seen that clip. You should already be instantly skeptical of anyone using fuzzy, all-encompassing definitions.
And what fuzzy, all-encompassing definition did Riley use that inspired this tirade exactly? Not a mental disorder?
I can think of 2 explanations for this 40% phenomena, and they are not mutually exclusive. One is that transgenders are just massive attention-seeking drama whores.
Says the person who looks like this.
2 is that transgenders are just extremely mentally ill.
And they don't have those fake mental disorders which are being overdiagnosed, just to be clear. They have the real ones, apparently.
Let's even take Princess Jules for an example. Much as I say that she seems to have little to actually complain about, that's not to say that she hasn't had problems. If we look around her channel for a bit, we can learn that she had an unhealthy relationship with her father. She's taken over-the-counter medication for depression. In the past, this has led to her becoming addicted to sleeping pills. And she was raped by a 40-year-old man when she was 14.
Wow, Omni, you're right. That's terrible. Hey, what is it you said about her earlier again? I'm trying to remember.
You remember what I said about sympathy? Well, I'm going one step further by trying to empathize with her. And the problem there is that I have never been so privileged in my entire adult life as Princess Jules is in that moment.
Now, to be fair, he did say in that moment. But doesn't that list of things that he just talked about kind of put the suicide attempt he talked about earlier in perspective? For example, wouldn't someone who's previously had bad experiences with medication be much more skeptical of doctors and therefore surgeons? With that skepticism even resulting in direct paranoia at some point? Mental health is not a moment-by-moment thing. There isn't one moment where somebody has a mental health issue and then a next moment where they don't. things like this fester with you for long periods of time. Although, to be fair, she does have 200,000 YouTube subscribers, and according to Omnizoa, that should cure all her mental health issues.
She wants to say that it's because she's transgender that she tried to kill herself?
No, even in your story, it appeared to be more about anxiety, paranoia, and feeling like her fears were being dismissed. When did anyone say it was because she was trans exactly? Anyway, he goes on to hammer this point in before going back to making fun of that one guy who doesn't have English as their first language, so I'm just cutting all of that out because this video is so damn repetitive that I honestly don't have anything to say about the next 3 or 4 minutes that I haven't already said the entire video.
Now, here's the cruel ultimatum I find myself torn between, because public opinion likes to define transgenderism in two largely separate and incompatible ways. The first definition is that transgenders are people who identify as a gender other than the gender they were born as. Right away, and the most important problem here is that you can't convince me to give a shit.
In fact, I give so little of a shit that I've been ranting about this topic for the past 40 minutes.
The second definition is, in my mind, at least marginally more credible. This is where we define a transgender as someone who suffers from gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria here meaning the experience of severe stress or anxiety relating to one's gender. It should be no surprise that many people, referred to as true scum or trans medicalists, are not keen to disassociate the two concepts. They see what happens when it's just an identity game, and people walk around like they can swap genders like pairs of underwear.
And now, I present to you all live footage of somebody explaining gender to Omnizoa.
It's like a new pair of underwear, you know? At first it's constrictive, but after a while it becomes a part of you.
To that end, I completely agree, but what you do is arguably worse. See, gender dysphoria is a narrow example of what would be otherwise termed body dysmorphia. This is a disorder situated around people who develop an unhealthy obsession with fixing some part of their body.
And again, this is one of the real mental disorders, not one of the fake ones that only exist because of broad definitions and that are being overdiagnosed and all of that. Again, this rhetoric doesn't make any sense. It's complete second by second, don't think about what I just said 3 minutes ago rhetoric. And because of that, it is utterly incoherent.
Here's the problem. When body dysmorphia manifests, typically in the form of eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia, everybody knows that the treatment can involve intervention, psychotherapy, mood stabilizers.
Okay, so mood stabilizers for anorexia are good, but hormones for dysphoria are bad. None of this makes any sense, but okay. To be clear, I'm sure Omni has some rationalization for these contradictions in his own nonsensical belief system, but he's not explaining it to the audience, so you know what? If you're going to be focused more on making fun of someone who can't speak the language you're talking to them in, and showing clips of a trans woman who's mentally ill, then I'm not giving you any charitability. I'm not giving you any benefit of the doubt. You either explain your full belief system to me, explain these contradictions, because clearly you have the time to, or I assume that you're just a hypocrite who hasn't thought out your belief system. There's really no other way.
And even rehab. Anything but playing into the person's delusions about themselves. Imagine going to a psychiatrist because you're starving yourself to death, and they say, well, Shirley, if you want to hit that cool 70 pounds, I recommend we get you on a fasting diet right away. No, that would never happen because it's medical malpractice.
That's a horrible comparison. The stress an anorexic feels over their weight is a delusion primarily because their perception of their weight is wrong. Transgender people who want to alter their body feel dysphoria over parts of their body that objectively exist. To steal a comparison from my friend Dakota, if somebody without a penis felt distress over having a penis, then that would be comparable to anorexia because both are based off of aspects of their body that, again, don't actually exist. But that is not what we are seeing with dysphoria.
Say it with me now. Reductio ad
Hakuna
absurdum.
Matata.
There we go. If you don't accept the same argument when I use it, you are a hypocrite. But Omni,
this isn't just about a body part, this is about an identity.
Reductio to Tweedledee and reductio to Tweedledum. If you don't accept the same argument when they use it, you are a hypocrite. You're contradicting yourself in your special pleading for a double standard.
So we have a person who lied about her race to advance her career and came up with a post hoc justification, a fetishist, and somebody who made herself blind? I just don't get the point in mentioning the middle one. She wanted to go blind. Now she objectively is that thing. Okay, I'm not sure what that proves exactly, but it did happen, I will give you that.
You want to know what my opinion of the transgender movement is? I hate it.
We figured that out already. Omni just goes on to give his final thoughts, so I'm cutting it here. As for my final thoughts, well, if I said everything I could say in this part of the video, it would just be me screaming for about 20 minutes. But I'm going to save you all that and instead just say this video was absolutely painful to sit through. Everything Omni says is wrong, his own belief system doesn't make any sense, and it's just such obvious nonsense that it's unbelievable an actual thinking human being would write down these arguments and then repeat them and then put them into an editor and then listen back to them and then put up pictures and videos that they think back it up when it's just awful. It is terrible. This is, hands down, the worst video I have covered so far. That's not saying much because it's only my 5th commentary, but as of right now, this is the worst video. If only because of its unbelievable length combined with its pure fractal wrongness. Good night and good luck. Oh, also, I went back afterwards to see just how much of the original video I needed to keep in to make this commentary. The answer is less than 17 minutes worth. When I can cut out over 60% of your video and still address basically every point you make, you've done something terribly wrong.